Hey people, welcome back. I am Indypride, and it's time to talk some more about everyone's favorite non-existent rodents of unusual size. We've talked about the end times before, the role the Skaven played in it, and why that period of Warhammer history is so reviled by some. While there are certainly plenty of moments from the end times I don't like, and the community obviously doesn't like, there are some story arcs and pieces of lore that I absolutely love from that time period. And one part of the Warhammer Armageddon that has always stood out to me is the arrival of the Verminlords. They were not new in 8th edition or the end time supplements. They'd been around for years before then. They got a pretty awesome facelift, a ton of lore, and a huge role to play in the end of all things, as they essentially sowed the seeds and even took part in the fall of Nuln, Middenheim, and the final destruction of the Karaz Angkor. But why are we talking about them? Well, as the third part of Creative Assembly's ritual marketing, presumably leading up to the Skaven reveal trailer, although we aren't quite sure what is the pot of gold at the end of the tunnel, but we can assume it's going to be a Skaven reveal trailer. We got a pretty awesome picture of a horned, shadowy figure in a warpstone cavern. What could it possibly mean? I mean, honestly, there's only two things that it could be. A Greyseer, the mages and prophets of the Horned Rat, a Lord-level caster that is virtually guaranteed to be in Total War Warhammer 2, or a Verminlord. Now, Verminlords are not such an obvious addition to the Skaven roster, at least not on launch. They couldn't lead armies in the tabletop before the End Time supplement books, and they're kind of a slight visual departure from the rest of the Armybook, but I'm definitely hoping they make it in. If not on Total War Warhammer 2 release day, then later down the line as DLC or free content. From a gameplay perspective, from a pure fun perspective, and honestly, just from an aesthetic perspective, I mean, look at them. They look so badass. They'd be an awesome addition to the series. But after my last Skaven video covering Clan Pestilence and Legendary Lords, I was getting some requests about Verminlords and the lore behind them. So after seeing that artwork teased today, figured I would oblige. So, Verminlords are the purest, most powerful manifestations of the Horned Rat. Much like the greater demons of chaos, each Verminlord is an avatar, a supremely terrifying incarnation of their patron god. They act as the Horned Rat's heralds, his assassins, his diplomats, and his generals, and their arrival in the Warhammer world pretty much spells doom for the planet, because ultimately, they get stuff done. It's not just their mastery of combat and magic, their immense size, or millennia of existence and knowledge that makes them so terrifying, but their ability to galvanize action and create some semblance of a cohesive, unified army amongst the Ratmen. Something that, as we know, is the antithesis of what the Skaven are typically about. Skaven bicker and squabble and betray each other at the drop of a hat, most often when they actually have a significant opportunity to do something important together, as a race. That is their essence, their very nature, what keeps them in check. And of course that's why, before the end times, they never successfully established an empire on the surface world and overrun the planet, even though they unquestionably had the numbers to do so. But the Verminlord's leadership, alongside the Great Horned One's insistence that the Council of 13 actually finally work together, gets their little butts moving in such a way that in only a few short years, they're swarming across the surface world and taking over important cities left and right. But to fully understand Verminlords, you first have to hear the story of Screech Verminking, the greatest of the 12 Shadow Lords of Decay. These Shadow Lords, these Verminlords, hail from the realm of Ruin, a twisted and terrifying realm in the ether that strangely echoes the mortal world, but in insane and impossible ways. Stairways in the Vermin Hall where they meet go on endlessly, but can be ascended in a few quick steps. Towers soar impossibly high into the sky, and the ground is constantly covered by millions of little rats who scream and squeal for the blessings of the Horned One, those Skaven who failed their patron god in life and were damned to an eternity in limbo. Much like the Council of 13 in the Under Empire, the Verminlords make their own council in the realm of Ruin, and Screech leads them, as he is truly the favored of the Horned Rat. Thankwell might fancy himself the owner of that title, but the Vermin King is on another level entirely. So in the first Great War between the Skaven and Nagash at Cripple Peak, the Ratmen realized that the Great Necromancer was, by far, the biggest threat to the planet and their own ambitions. Probably the biggest threat to the world ever. Nagash was terrifying at this point. He was summoning literally millions of undead, and poisoning the great river Mortis, and in general being a gigantic dickhead, ruining the Hekara and turning it into the undead land that we know now. So, the Council of 13 voted unanimously, for the first time in their history in fact, because Skaven can't ever agree on anything, to kill him. They forged the Fellblade, a blade of pure warpstone, and gave it to Alcatizar the Conqueror, last of the priest kings of Nehekara, who ended the Necromancer's great ritual and prevented the entire world from being turned into an undead paradise. And this pleased the Great Horned Rat greatly, because the Council had shown a very unskaven-like quality of being able to work together towards a common goal. But of course he immediately became angry when he saw that soon after they went back to their petty rivalries, squabbling and fighting and backstabbing, despite a golden opportunity to take huge swaths of the surface world. So the deity punished them, plucking the Lords of Decay from the mortal world and throwing them into a pit in the realm of ruin, where they languished for an ungodly amount of time. Over the countless centuries, they became fused into a single disgusting entity with many faces and limbs, all screeching and blaming and cursing each other, until the Horned Rat realized that they had been the greatest Council of 13 in history, and elected to end their suffering. With a searing bolt of warp lightning, out of the mewling mass of the Lords of Decay, Skreech Verminking, greatest of all Verminlords and truest avatar of the Horned Rat, was born. He incorporated within his being the stealth of Clan Eshin, the arcane talent of the Greyseers, the technological insight of Clan Scryer, the flesh-crafting skills of Clan Molder, and the warrior ambition of the Warlord clans, all while a burning zeal to spread corruption and disease manifested itself deep within his heart. Now, while I've been hyping up these Verminlords as greater demon-level characters of pure badassery, and they are, it is important to remember that they still have the same fears and ambition and penchant for treachery that their mortal counterparts exhibit, just to a lesser extent. They still piss themselves when the Horned Rat shows up, they still bicker and plot against each other, they still do many of the same things the Lords of Decay do. They're just a bit more terrifying as they do it, which is saying a lot honestly, because the Council of 13 is no joke whatsoever. They're comprised of literally some of the most powerful beings in the entire Warhammer setting. So it shouldn't really come as a surprise when presenting a united front with all the Skaven clans together and their leaders and their Verminlord avatars. The Skaven are hands down one of, if not arguably, the most powerful races in the setting. Chaos would of course vehemently disagree, but that war between Chaos and Skaven, if it should ever come to fruition, to all-out war, would be one for the ages. But one of my favorite things about Verminlords are that they don't just come in one variant. There are plenty of flavors to choose from. Verminlord Warbringers are known as Tyrants of Battle, and are beacons of martial prowess that clan rats and storm vermin flock to in the middle of war. They're the most commonly seen on the battlefield, although they're still incredibly rare. It's very uncommon for a Verminlord to manifest himself on the battlefield, but their Doomglaives and edgy Grimdarkness can cut through whole ranks of Empire State troops or Dwarfen shield walls in a single blow. Verminlord Corruptors are the Pestilent Reapers, colors of civilization that spread disease and plague wherever their presence manifests itself. As such, they are most closely tied to, of course, Clan Pestilence. Verminlord Deceivers are lords of assassins, known as the Shadows That Kill, and are essentially the demonic avatars of Clan Eshin. They wield warp stilettos the size of an adult human, so you can imagine the kind of damage they can do. These guys are gigantic, I'm not kidding. They are really, really big and terrifying to behold, and they're pretty good at kill stealing as well, as Archaon the Everchosen would attest to in his famous duel in Middenheim. And finally, the Verminlord Warpseers, the Great Manipulators, are most similar to Clan Scrutin and the Greyseers, although of course not necessarily aligned with that particular clan. They are the most conniving, always scheming and plotting their ascendancy, and they can call and control those same rats from the realm of ruin that I mentioned earlier to rush forth in huge vermin tides that gnaw the souls of unfortunate victims. And if that wasn't enough, they have the gift of foresight with these orbs that can unleash pure, corrupting, and insanity-inducing warpstone in battle. They can see literally into the future, so they can plan for a certain event during a fight or a duel, and basically change the outcome before it even happens. So yeah, like I said, Verminlords are badass. They've got a lot of flavor, a lot of edginess, and a lot of over-the-top lore that fits pretty perfectly into this trilogy that we've got going right now, and their models are, at least in my opinion, pure awesomeness. Like, they have some gorgeous models. With that said, though, and as I alluded to earlier, Verminlords have been around for much longer than just the end times. There's art and lore stretching back multiple editions for them, from Forge World to 7th edition tabletop to the artwork in the army books themselves. And that stuff is worth discussing as well. On the left, I believe, is a 7th edition official rendition of a Verminlord. In the middle is an End Times Warbringer, and on the right is the Forge World model. So, if you want to see them in this game, which of course some people won't want to see them in the trilogy at all, which model or art style of these three do you think would fit best, or be the base upon which Creative Assembly should build the in-game render, if we happen to get them in Game 2 or sometime afterwards? I personally really like the End Times models and artwork. I think they look huge and terrifying, and just exude this malevolence in much the same way Greater Demons do, but honestly, I think the 7th edition artwork for them is quite solid too, as you can see right now on the right side of your screen. That artwork looks great, and I would not be sad, I would not be even a little bit sad if we got that kind of model in the Total War Warhammer trilogy. With that said though, I definitely like the Verminlord on the left a bit more. I think that art style is a bit more fitting for the Total War Warhammer trilogy, and just sticks out a bit more, but that could just be because it's in color and and the 7th edition artwork's in black and white. Either way, I think both look pretty awesome. At the end of the day though, we aren't guaranteed to see the Shadow Lords whatsoever. They're definitely near the top of my list of favorite units in Warhammer Fantasy. They've got awesome kit, awesome abilities, fantastic models, and some pretty decent lore to back it all up. So what do you guys think? Do you think that was a Greyseer or a Verminlord in the ritual picture released earlier this morning? Do you think we'll get an opportunity to see Verminlords sometime during this trilogy? And do you even want to see them? I feel like some people won't want to see Verminlords, feel like they don't fit with the faction aesthetic, don't really fit in with the army roster in general, but I feel like that group will probably be in the minority, but speak up if that's how you feel. There's definitely nothing wrong with that. One thing I have neglected to mention thus far, though, is their actual implementation in the Total War Warhammer series. How would you gain access to them in campaign? What are their abilities on the battlefield, and how would they translate to the video game itself? Well, we know the ritual sites are going to play a large role in Game 2, as each faction competes for the Vortex and races to complete objectives. They'll gain a form of currency that will end up being race-specific, that allows them to upgrade cities or spread their culture, and unlock higher tiers of technology and such. We don't know the full details on the ritual system yet, but we do know they're an important component of the Vortex campaign in general. So for the Skaven, certain higher tier units could be locked behind technology that is acquired through these ritual objectives. On top of that, it's important to remember there's a dark, religious component to the arrival of Verminlords, and Greyseers play a large role in that. They are the liaisons between the mortal world and the realm of ruin, and much like demonic summonings, rituals need to be performed to allow the avatars of the Horned Rat to physically manifest and gain corporeal form. So in my mind, and I think this could work well for Great Unclean Ones, Bloodthirsters, Lords of Change, and Keeper of Secrets later down the line when they come with the Demons of Chaos as well, I feel like you should have to complete objectives and win battles at these ritual sites to gain favor of the Horned Rat. And once you acquire enough, you can summon a Verminlord. Essentially, a very similar mechanic is already in Game 1 with the Green Knight and Bretonia, but it translates pretty well for these other factions as well, I feel. With that said, obviously there are going to be some named Greater Demon and Chaos characters like Skarbrand, or Kugath Plaguefather, or Kairos Fateweaver, who have a good chance at starting as legendary lords for their respective demon factions, so summoning rituals won't be the only way you gain access to them, but at least for the Skaven, it works, and I think to a lesser extent it could work pretty well for the Demons of Chaos as well. Combine that with a requiring certain level for a Greyseer, so I think something around like level 15 or 17, similar to the level characters from other factions required to get their top tier mount, and you could then unlock the ability to summon a Verminlord with a Greyseer. Now these summonings do go awry in the lore on occasion. A Thankwall, Greyseer Thankwall, accidentally summoned Skarbrand, the exiled one, the famous Bloodthirster of Khorne. That whole situation comes to mind. It was pretty hilarious in the novel, but I don't think that particular component has to translate to the game, although I think it could actually end up being pretty funny if they manage to, like, say you try to summon a Verminlord, but you end up summoning like a Keeper of Secrets, and you have to like fight that in the middle of a battle. That would be pretty awesome and hilarious. But from a battle perspective, as I spelled out earlier, the different flavors of Verminlord do have their own playstyles as well. They could, if CA wanted to go the extra mile, they could really differentiate the playstyles between the different flavors of Verminlord. So Warpseers sit back and they throw globes of poisonous warp dust while shooting blasts of warp lightning, functioning kind of as a support catch unit that does DPS from afar. Corruptors and Warbringers both like to get into the thick of the melee combat, but where the Warbringer is pure carnage and melee prowess in combat, the Corruptor is more of a constant life-draining force, probably with a HP degen aura similar to the one I want Lord Skrulk to have. Obviously they deal poison damage in melee and would have access to the lore of Plague. And Deceivers, well, Deceivers have the opportunity to be one of the most unique and most entertaining units in the trilogy. This doesn't just apply to Verminlord Deceivers though, I want it to apply to all Skaven Assassin heroes in general. So I'm talking about the Deathmaster and those single entity murder units as well. I want them to have stealth mechanics, the ability to run while hidden, and an active ability like Kisho Ninja had from Shogun 2 that allows them to get insanely close to an enemy unit without being revealed. I want their first attack out of that ability to deal a critical strike of sorts, so extra damage, and I want them to be very good at murdering single entity units. The whole playstyle behind these assassin units is obviously very different in the tabletop, where you would essentially hide them in infantry units and they'd have special rules to deal extra damage to whichever unfortunate lord or hero happened to roll into combat with the unit they were hiding in. That can't translate to Total War Warhammer at all. You can't hide heroes or lords inside units, so giving them the ability to get very, very close to enemy lords and heroes or artillery crews and put the hurt on them in very quick fashion would be very nice and definitely help them become a much more interesting kind of character. And it should be apparent that's very different from the magic missile lord sniping we had at the start of Game 1. Those didn't put your characters at risk at all. This kind of playstyle would. You have to get into melee and put your character in a very vulnerable position where they could very easily get surrounded and die to an enemy army. It adds some really nice risk-reward to the equation, which I think is a fundamental component of any multiplayer game or even single-player campaign as well. And remember, it's not just the Skaven that a gameplay mechanic like this would benefit. K-Knight Assassins for the Dark Elves and heroes like Shadowblade would be a much more exciting pick if they aren't just a run-of-the-mill duelist. They need something to differentiate themselves and set them apart from the rest of the pack. On top of stealth mechanics though, Deceivers have spells from the lore of Ruin, a specific one called Skitter Leap. Again, this is a spell I would like CA to really step outside the box on and actually design to be fun and unique and interesting to use from the ground up. In the tabletop, it allows a target infantry unit to teleport anywhere on the battlefield. Now think about that for a second. Think about how much fun that would be to take a Stormvermin Halberd unit, cast Skitter Leap on it, and allow them to appear 50 feet behind an enemy infantry line. That would be a lot of fun. That's the kind of spell that isn't direct damage, but is very impactful, that makes magic a lot more interesting in the Warhammer series. I don't want to see on launch day Skitter Leap be like plus 36% speed, plus 24 melee attack. I'm gonna go crazy if I see another generic spell like that. It's gonna make me mad. If teleporting literally cannot work on this game engine whatsoever, and it's possible that it can't, then make it so that the infantry unit becomes completely invisible until an enemy literally runs into it or the unit attacks, so we can at least position the unit appropriately without the enemy being able to see it at all. But if it's possible to make it a teleport spell, do it like that. That would be so much fun. And if neither of those work, find some way to differentiate some of these spells so they're actually unique to the faction. We need more stuff like that in the trilogy, I think. And then you think about what Skitter Leap would mean to a Verminlord Deceiver. Being able to stealth into melee with a high value target, kill it, or at least severely damage it, and then Skitter Leap away before it could be surrounded or destroyed. That's the kind of thing I want to see in Total War Warhammer 2. See it continuously pushing that boundary with the units and factions, and giving them truly unique playstyles. In the newer editions of Tabletop, all Verminlord variants have a 5-up ward save, while the Warpseer had a 4-up ward save. So that would roughly translate, I guess, to about a 20% physical resistance, like the Tree Spirit units for the Wood Elves. And in turn, that would of course make them susceptible to magic attacks, which is exactly what you should come to expect from demonic units in general. Resistant to physical damage, susceptible to magic damage. But at the end of the day, we'll see how it all shakes out. Those are some of my ideas for Verminlords. Really want to see them in the trilogy. I think they're an awesome unit. I know I've said that like 37 times. But they might not even end up being in the game at launch. So if not, hopefully we'll see them later down the line. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know if there's something specific you would like me to talk about next. Anything you want me to cover. And I'll see you all next time. Indypride, signing out for now.